June 16, 1944, Yada, Kyushu. The smoke hasn't lifted yet. A day earlier, American bombers, the new kind, the ones no one in Japan had ever seen, came over the island in bright daylight. They weren't like the old B-17s or the lumbering B-24s. They flew higher, faster, quieter. And when they left, the steelworks at Yada was burning. Now, under a pale gray sky, Japanese soldiers and factory workers move carefully through the twisted remains of what fell. A giant aluminum wing lies bent against a rice field embankment. The kanji stenciled across its side reads simply, Flying Fortress, Type Unknown. An officer crouches beside a shattered radial engine half buried in the mud. The propeller blades are torn backward, but the cylinders gleam even through the soot. He touches the metal and feels its warmth. It's still hot, he says. It fell from the edge of space. Word spreads quickly. Engineers from the Army Air Technical Research Institute arrive before sunset. They wear armbands marked with the rising sun and carry notebooks, cameras, and calipers. To them, this is more than debris, it is a message from another world. By lantern light, they examine what they can. The fragments are enormous. Sections of fuselage so smooth they reflect the flames around them, rivets pressed with uncanny precision, wires bundled in color-coded looms, red, blue, yellow, so different from the hand-wrapped cables of a Nakajima or Mitsubishi bomber. They find a partially intact section of the nose. Inside, shattered plexiglass lies among bent frames. A single dial, still legible, reads cabin pressure. The chief engineer frowns. Pressure? He mutters. They pressurize the aircrew? Someone else points to the remains of a gun sight unlike any they've seen. A round periscope connected to thick electrical wiring. Automatic targeting, he guesses. This isn't one plane. It's a flying laboratory. They load the largest pieces onto trucks bound for Tachikawa Air Arsenal, near Tokyo, where it will be studied in secret. The officer in charge, Captain Shiro Takahashi, writes his first report that night. Recovered wreckage suggests the enemy possesses an aircraft beyond known performance limits. Estimated altitude, over 9,000 meters. Speed, near 600 kilometers per hour. Type unknown. Materials appear foreign and advanced. Recommend urgent investigation. At dawn, villagers gather to watch the convoy leave. Among the wreckage left behind, a young mechanic picks up a strip of aluminum skin, smooth, light, and perfectly drilled. He turns it over in his hands and whispers, if they can build one of these, they can build thousands. High above, the sound of engines returns, distant, faint, almost ghostly. The sky is clear, but the noise lingers, rolling like thunder over the mountains of Kyushu. The men below look up. They cannot see anything, not yet, but already Japan's engineers know. Something has arrived that they cannot stop. July 1944, Tachikawa Air Arsenal, Western Tokyo. A convoy of military trucks crawls through the gates at dawn, engines rumbling under the weight of tarped wreckage. Soldiers jump down, their uniforms stained with soot and road dust. Behind them, engineers in white coats and caps await quietly with clipboards in hand. On the trucks lie the remains of what the Japanese army has already code-named Bakudai Heikoki, the giant bomber. The crates are unloaded into hangar number 5, sealed from the rest of the facility. The hangar smells of oil, wet canvas, and sawdust. When the covers are pulled back, the light strikes curved metal that glints silver, flawless even after falling from 10 kilometers above. Chief Technical Officer Colonel Hajime Kudo, a veteran aircraft designer from Nakajima, steps forward. His team circles the debris like archaeologists. Take care, he warns. This is not a wreck. This is a teacher. The first inspection. They begin sorting the fragments by type. Fuselage frames, engine mounts, fragments of wiring. The metal feels alien. The alloy is light but strong, smooth where Japanese steel would ripple. An engineer files a small shaving and holds it to the light. Deraillement, he says. But different. More copper, perhaps. On a table, they lay out a section of the bomber's skin, wide, seamless sheets held by perfectly flush rivets. The precision stuns them. Each row is straight as a blade. One man measures the spacing. Every 2 centimeters exactly, he whispers. Even our best workers cannot repeat this so perfectly by hand. Another technician finds a data plate still intact. Boeing Aircraft Company, Model B-29, Serial 42 to 24582. A murmur ripples through the group. Boeing. A name few have ever seen on metal this size. Dissecting the monster. By afternoon, they have identified parts of the enormous wings and one nearly intact landing gear assembly. The struts are chrome-coated, the hydraulic lines color-coded. Everything about it feels deliberate, simplified for mass assembly. They open one crate and reveal a heavy circular turret, burned but intact. Inside, complex wiring leads to small mechanical gyros. The label on the control box reads General Electric Central Fire Control. Colonel Kudo frowns. General Electric? Then the guns are not aimed by hand. His deputy nods. No, they are coordinated by sighting computers. The colonel sighs. A flying fortress indeed. Nearby, a younger engineer studies a section of plexiglass canopy, unusually thick yet crystal clear. They even use plastics we can't make, he says. Their chemistry must be years ahead. The cockpit discovery. A section of the forward fuselage is reassembled with wooden supports. Inside, the remnants of the flight deck come together. Instrument panels, control yokes, rudder pedals, fragments of insulation. One engineer points at the air ducts and valves. This must be part of a pressurization system. They piece together copper tubing and compressors from beneath the cockpit floor. They fly higher than we can breathe, another remarks. Then they notice the windows, double-paned, sealed. Pressurized, Kudo confirms softly. Not for a few minutes, for hours. He writes in his report. Enemy has achieved sustained high-altitude flight for long-range operations. Fuselage integrity suitable for cabin pressurization, previously believed impossible in combat aircraft. Late that night, when the others leave, Kudo remains. He stands before the stripped-down fuselage frame, hands in his coat pockets. The metal glows faintly in the lamplight. He realizes what this means. The Americans have built not just a bomber, but an industrial miracle, precision machining, automated gunnery, mass production, and metallurgy beyond Japan's reach. He whispers to himself, "We are craftsmen. They are manufacturers." Outside, the engines of a single Ki-61 fighter echo faintly across the night airfield. Its sound is small, fragile, compared to the idea of the thing that now lies before him. He closes his notebook with a quiet sigh. Tomorrow the Army will demand numbers, range, altitude, horsepower. But Kudo already knows the most important number of all. 0. That is how many of these Japan can ever build. July 20, 1944, Tachikawa Air Arsenal, Engine Test Bay 3. A new crate has arrived. The stenciled letters read, Property of the United States Army Air Forces, Wright Aeronautical Division. Inside lies the heart of the monster, a half-intact Wright R-3350 duplex Cyclone, the engine that lifted the B-29 Superfortress above the reach of Japan's sky. 18 cylinders arranged in twin radial rows. Massive cooling fins like armor. Turbos, pipes, and fuel lines curling through it like veins. When the engineers pull away the fragments of the cowling, the room falls silent. They've never seen anything so complex built on such a massive scale. Colonel Kudo steps closer. "This is not an engine," he murmurs. "It is a power plant." They begin measuring. Each cylinder, 6 1/8 inches across. Each stroke, 6 1/3 inches long. Total displacement, 54 liters. Continuous output, over 2,200 horsepower. To Japanese engineers used to 1,200 horsepower Nakajima or Mitsubishi engines, it feels absurd, twice the strength yet light enough to fly. Kudo taps the block. Where does all this power come from? The answer lies in the rear section. A network of ducts wraps around the engine, feeding a large turbine, the turbosupercharger. Exhaust gases drive it, forcing air back into the cylinders at immense pressure. One technician stares. "They use exhaust to power intake," he says, astonished. "They recycle what we throw away. And at 30,000 feet, that difference decides who flies and who falls." The metallurgy revelation. They cut a piece of the exhaust manifold for testing. It resists every blade they use. Finally, they file a sample and study it. The result is stunning, an alloy of nickel, chromium, and cobalt, able to withstand heat above 800 degrees Celsius without deforming. Japan has no access to such metals in quantity. Nickel and chromium are luxury materials, imports that barely reach their shores anymore. One metallurgist writes in his notes, "Even if we understood every secret of this engine, we could not reproduce it. We lack the metals to withstand its heat." Kudo adds quietly, "Then we do not lack knowledge. We lack a nation's worth of minds." Taming fire. They mount the damaged engine on a test stand, repairing what they can. The first attempt to start it fails, bearings seized. The second, with oil fed by hand pumps, coughs to life for a few seconds. Even that brief roar shakes the hangar. The sound is different, Not a whine, not a rattle, but a deep, clean thunder that feels alive. It vibrates through the floor, through their boots, through their ribs. When it stops, the air feels hollow. Someone whispers, "It sounds like the earth itself breathing." Kudo just stares at the still engine. "This," he says, "is what it takes to lift 10 tons to the stratosphere. This is not war. This is industry turned into sound." Days later, they record their findings, comparing it to their own engines. Kudo reads them aloud for the team to hear. "Our Nakajima Hammer, 1800 horsepower, operational ceiling 26,000 feet. But it overheats easily. The Mitsubishi Kinsei, 1500 horsepower, ceiling 23,000 feet. Reliable but limited. The American Wright R3350, over 2200 horsepower, ceiling 32,000 feet, and it maintains full boost thanks to its turbo system. The gap," Kudo explains, "is not just in power, it is in philosophy. The Americans designed for redundancy and survival," he says. "Multiple oil pumps, dual ignition, self-sealing fuel lines. Where we shave weight, they build strength. Where we take risks, they build protection." He pauses, looking at the young engineers. "Their pilots fight with machines that protect them. Ours fight with machines that glorify their deaths." The supercharger mystery. When they dismantle the rear section, they find the turbine wheels, tiny blades of perfect balance, turning on sealed bearings smoother than glass. No one can tell how they were made. Not by hand. Not by the tools they possess. A younger engineer leans close and whispers, "Sensei, it's not just about power. It's about control. They can keep this engine alive for hundreds of hours." Kudo nods slowly. "And every one they build will perform exactly like this one." The realization strikes the room silent. Thousands of identical hearts, beating across the Pacific in perfect rhythm. When night falls, only Kudo and a single assistant remain. The boy, barely 20, stares at the engine, huge, scarred, and silent. "Sir," he asks softly, "could we ever build something like this?" Kudo doesn't answer right away. He looks at the engine, its curves, its precision, its terrifying beauty, and finally says, "No. Because we still believe machines should serve honor. They believe machines should serve victory." The boy writes those words in his notebook, underlining only one, victory. Outside, the faint hum of Japanese fighters passes overhead, thin, fragile, and small. Inside, the American engine sits motionless, but its presence fills the hangar like thunder after the storm. August 2, 1944, Tachikawa Air Arsenal, Reconstruction Bay. The sound of hammers echoes through the hangar. The pieces of the Superfortress are coming together, carefully, methodically, under the eyes of engineers who can barely believe what they are touching. 3 weeks have passed since the first shipment of wreckage arrived. Now, on trestles and wooden scaffolds, the skeleton of a B-29 fuselage begins to take shape. Its massive circular cross-section dwarfs anything Japan has built. Even half complete, it stretches longer than a G-4M Betty bomber from nose to tail. Colonel Kudo watches from the catwalk above, taking notes as teams measure and photograph every section. Below him, an engineer calls out the reading from a pressure bulkhead gauge. Thickness, 5 millimeters. Reinforced ribs every 10 centimeters. Structure, perfectly sealed. They know what it means. This bomber could hold air. Pressurized flight. At altitudes where Japanese bombers froze and stalled, this one flew warm and steady. The pressurized fortress. They reconstruct the cockpit section with care. Inside, bits of control cable and ducting form a maze of silver and copper. A small rotary valve assembly catches everyone's eye. Part of the environmental control system, connected to compressors salvaged from beneath the floor. Kudo crouches beside it, examining the remaining seals. Rubber composition, synthetic, not natural, he mutters. They found a substitute for our most precious material. Japan's supply of natural rubber had been cut off since early in the war. Yet the Americans build entire aircraft lined with synthetic hoses, seals, and insulation. All standardized, all identical. Even their chemistry fights for them, one engineer says quietly. They test the insulation of the fuselage, layers of fabric and foil sandwiching air pockets. Thermal barrier, another notes. It keeps the crew warm at 9,000 meters. They imagine American pilots flying in comfort, gloved hands on heated controls, sipping oxygen from regulated valves, while Japanese crews still wear fur-lined suits and freeze in open cockpits. One engineer whispers, "We are sending men to die of frostbite before they ever see the enemy." The remote eyes. Next, they examine the gunnery system. Recovered fragments reveal not handheld machine guns but remotely operated turrets. each directed by sighting domes positioned along the fuselage. The wiring leads to small analog computers, marked with names like General Electric and Sperry. Colonel Kudo peers into one of the remaining units. Inside are rows of polished gears, miniature gyroscopes, and cams so smooth they look machined for watches. A calculating device, he realizes. They have turned mathematics into a weapon. The discovery spreads through the research team like electricity. The B-29 doesn't just shoot, it predicts. The computers measure range, speed, and deflection instantly, letting a gunner sitting mid-fuselage aim at enemies he cannot even see directly. A pilot-turned-analyst remarks bitterly, "We ask our aces to be gods. They make their average men into machines that can never miss." The cabin of logic. In the cockpit, the engineers find something that shocks them more than the electronics: clarity. Every control is labeled. Every switch grouped by function. Fuel, hydraulics, oxygen, engines, all color-coded, all placed within easy reach. Kudo runs his fingers over a throttle quadrant, still smooth under the dust. The handles fit perfectly in the palm. "They designed this for tired men," he says. "Not for heroes, not for samurai. For men who must fight day after day and live." He compares it to the cockpit of the Mitsubishi G4M, cramped, hot, controls scattered without pattern. The B-29 feels almost calm. Another engineer remarks, "Even their machines assume the pilot will come home." No one answers. They all understand the difference. Blueprint of a civilization. By late afternoon, the sunlight slants through the hangar windows. The reassembled sections of the B-29 gleam under sheets of polished metal. When viewed from above, its proportions are flawless. Symmetry in every curve, efficiency in every joint. Kudo stands with his senior engineers, all silent. He gestures toward the aircraft. "This is not only a bomber," he says. "It is an equation written in steel and discipline." One man adds, "Then what are we building?" Kudo sighs. "We build with pride. They build with purpose. The difference will decide the war." The moment of realization. That night, after the workers leave, he walks the length of the incomplete fuselage. The lamplight reflects off every rivet line. Each one feels like a heartbeat. He rests his hand on the cold skin of the bomber and whispers, "You were made by a nation that believes every problem has a machine to solve it. We still believe every problem has a sacrifice." He writes in his private log before leaving, "Every detail of this aircraft speaks of abundance, of energy, metal, and hands. It was not built to be exceptional, it was built to be repeatable. And that is why it terrifies me." Outside, the night is still. Far away, faintly, an air raid siren wails across Tokyo. The engineers at Tachikawa look up instinctively, and wonder if the next time they hear engines in the sky, it will be the same machine whose pieces they now study. August 18, 1944, Tachikawa Arsenal, briefing room number 3. The air is thick with cigarette smoke and tension. At the front of the room stands a blackboard covered with chalk sketches, airflow ducts, turret placements, and one phrase written boldly across the top: B-29, strategic implications. Colonel Hajime Kudo faces the assembled officers, men from the Imperial General Headquarters and the Army Air Technical Bureau. Their uniforms are crisp, their eyes tired but defiant. He begins quietly, "Gentlemen, our reconstruction is complete, and you will not like what we found. The numbers that shattered illusions." He slides a single sheet of paper across the table, his voice calm, precise. The American B-29 Superfortress reaches speeds of 357 miles per hour. Our Ki-67 Hiryu barely reaches 334. Its range, over 3,250 miles. Ours less than 3,000. It carries 20,000 pounds of bombs. Ours can manage barely 2,000. Its service ceiling is nearly 32,000 feet, with a crew enclosed in a pressurized, heated cabin. Ours remain unpressurized, open to freezing winds. He pauses, letting the silence linger. The B-29 flies higher, carries 9 times the payload, and can strike Japan without refueling. A general scoffs. Impossible. No bomber can lift such weight to that altitude. Kudo meets his gaze. It can. It already has. He points to a photograph on the wall, the charred remains of Yada Steel Works, bombed in June by aircraft that no one had seen coming. "This is not theory," Kudo says. "This machine already exists. And it belongs to an empire that understands production." The room falls silent. A nation's arithmetic. One engineer finally speaks, his voice low. "Even if we could copy the design, each would take a year to complete. They build thousands. We cannot even melt the metals they use. Kudo adds, "Our estimates show the United States now builds more aircraft engines in 1 month than Japan has built in this entire war." An old general's hand trembles as he lights another cigarette. "Then it's over," he mutters. But another officer protests, "No, we still have spirit." Kudo turns sharply toward him. Spirit cannot climb to 10,000 meters. Spirit cannot carry 10 tons of bombs across an ocean. He pauses, voice softening. "This is not defeatism, gentlemen. This is physics." The words hang in the air, heavy as smoke. The industrial revelation. Kudo walks back to the board and points to the B-29's modular design. "The Americans don't build aircraft one by one," he explains. "They build them in sections, nose, fuselage, tail, each in a different factory. Then they fit together like pieces of armor." He holds up a short section of tubing, stamped with a serial number and production code. This line tells them where and when it was made, who made it, and what it fits into. Every bolt identical. Every panel interchangeable. Every worker part of one great assembly. He lets the part drop onto the table with a soft metallic sound. "This is how they win," he says quietly. "An army of machines building machines." Then, almost to himself, "We still build aircraft like swords, beautiful but handmade, fragile, unique." The officers say nothing. Their silence is its own admission. After the meeting, Kudo walks outside. The sun is low, painting the Tokyo sky orange and gold. He watches the small factories in the distance. Workshops where men hammer sheet metal by hand, sweat dripping in the summer heat. He thinks of the young pilots he's met, boys who write farewell poems before missions they won't return from. They have bravery. But bravery is not steel. He recalls the words of an American engineer he met years before the war in Zurich. "Wars are not won by heroes. They're won by factories." Back then, Kudo had dismissed it as arrogance. Now, watching the chimney smoke weakly against the dying light, he finally understands what that man meant. That night, he writes in his journal by the faint glow of an oil lamp. "The B-29 is not merely a machine. It is a mirror. It shows us our pride, our weakness, and the future we refuse to see. When these aircraft come in numbers, our cities will burn, and with them, our illusions." He closes the notebook, listening to the distant sound of Japanese bombers returning from China. Engines straining, cockpits unheated, bomb bays nearly empty. He exhales slowly, whispering into the dark, "We built courage. They built capability." And for the first time, Colonel Hajime Kudo feels something colder than fear, the quiet certainty of understanding. March 9, 1945, Tokyo, 10:58 p.m. The sirens begin as a distant wail. Then the hum builds, low at first like thunder rolling in from the sea. Moments later, the sound becomes unmistakable. Dozens, then hundreds. Colonel Hajime Kudo steps out onto the roof of the Tachikawa arsenal. He knows that sound by heart now, 4 deep engines synchronized perfectly vibrating through the night air. The Superfortresses have come. He looks east. The horizon flickers with the faint pulse of light, small at first, then swelling into waves. The first incendiaries are already falling over the city. The arrival of the B-29s. Each bomber glides over the capital at 9,000 feet, invisible except for the dull red glow of its exhausts. From the ground they look serene, like slow-moving constellations. Then the first cluster of napalm canisters splits open. The sky blooms with orange fire. Everywhere rooftops erupt, paper, timber, tatami, all igniting in seconds. The wind catches it, turning narrow streets into furnaces. Within minutes, Tokyo's eastern wards are a single moving sheet of flame. Kudo watches in silence. He knows what machine built this apocalypse. He knows how its engines breathe, how its fuselage holds pressure, how its gunners see without touching their guns. He had touched those parts once, cold, perfect, lifeless. Now he sees what they were built for. An inferno without end. The heat rises even at Tachikawa, miles away. The air smells of ash, kerosene, and something worse, the burning of everything human. Across the city, firestorms merge. Oxygen is sucked out of entire neighborhoods. The sky glows red, then white. A pilot in one of the bombers later wrote, "We could see Tokyo burning from 150 miles away." Kudo closes his eyes. He can still picture the rows of B-29 fragments laid out on the hangar floor months earlier. The wiring, the aluminum, the polished gears. He had thought of them as parts of a machine. But now he realizes, this is the machine's true shape. Not the metal, but the system that created it. A system of factories, supply chains, mathematics, and manpower. A nation that had made war an industry. By dawn, Tokyo is gone. 80,000 dead. 1 million homeless. 40 square kilometers of the city turned to cinders. Kudo drives into the ruins at sunrise. The streets are black rivers of soot. Telephone poles lean like broken matchsticks. A twisted bicycle frame sticks out of the mud beside what used to be a home. He stops at what was once a schoolyard. In the center lies a shape he recognizes, an iron piston half buried in ash, marked with faint letters, Pratt and Whitney. He picks it up with trembling hands. The same part he'd studied once in his hangar, now resting in the ruins of his capital. He turns it over and whispers, 18 of these, to make one engine. For engines, to burn a city. Then he lowers it gently back into the ashes. Weeks later, Kudo's report to the army is brief and final. The B-29 is not merely superior technology. It is the product of an entire civilization organized for war. Ours is not. He adds a final note for himself, never sent. When a machine becomes more perfect than the men who fight it, the war is already over. That night, as he walks home past the shattered houses, the wind carries the smell of charred wood and damp rain. He looks up at the sky, clear now, empty. And for the first time he does not feel anger or pride. Only awe and sorrow. April 1945, Nagoya, Japan. The airbase is silent except for the distant drone of engines on test stands. Colonel Hajime Kudo walks slowly through the remains of the Nakajima aircraft factory, once the pride of Japanese aviation. Now shattered glass crunches under his boots. Roofs hang open to the sky where incendiaries tore through the steel. He passes rows of half-finished Ki-84 Hayats, Japan's most advanced fighters, their fuselages blackened and empty, wings stripped of paint. Men in greasy uniforms sweep debris into piles, their faces gray with exhaustion. At the end of the hangar stands a small group of engineers. They've gathered around a salvaged B-29 engine nacelle, one of the few components recovered from a bomber shot down weeks earlier. Kudo joins them quietly. No one salutes. There's no point anymore. The power they couldn't match. The engine lies open, its cylinders gleaming even under soot. 18 pistons, murmurs a mechanic. 18 lungs. He points to the inner surfaces, still polished, still perfect after burning through the air of Tokyo. Kudo nods. The Pratt & Whitney are 3350. 2,200 horsepower. Turbo-supercharged. Air-cooled. It runs like a living thing. Another engineer adds, we cannot build one like it. Not even close. Our machining tolerances are too wide. Our alloys too weak. The Americans machine this with precision we can't reproduce at scale, not by hand, not by tool. Kudo places his hand on the engine casing. It's warm from the sun. He whispers, it's not just the engine that's powerful. It's the world that built it. He sees it clearly now, steel mills, oil refineries, machine shops, all synchronized by telephones and railways, all running on fuel and mathematics. The B-29's power comes from that, not from metal. Weeks pass. Each morning, the sirens sound again, B-29 sweeping over Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, Yokohama. There's no point hiding anymore. Japan's cities vanish one by one, turned to ash by aircraft the nation had once thought impossible. The engineers keep meeting not because they still expect to win, but because it's all they know how to do. They draw, they measure, they write numbers that no longer matter. One evening, as another raid burns on the horizon, Kudo looks around the workshop. We used to design to win, he says softly. Now we design so history will remember we tried. A young technician asks, Colonel, why do they still come? Haven't we lost enough? Kudo stares into the distance, the glow of the fire reflected in his glasses. They come, he says, because they can. And because we can't stop them. The truth that couldn't be spoken. In May, Kudo is summoned to Tokyo for a final conference. What remains of the technical bureau gathers in a cold, dimly lit room. The generals demand a new countermeasure, something, anything that could stop the B-29. He lays his notes on the table. His voice is calm. There is no countermeasure, he says. We cannot fight a machine made from a nation's soul. An officer slams his fist on the table. You speak like a traitor. Kudo meets his eyes. No, sir. I speak like an engineer. Reality does not care about loyalty. The room goes silent. Outside, the sound of bombers approaches again. The men don't even flinch. A flicker of humanity. That night, back at his quarters, Kudo finds an old drawing rolled in a tube, one of his early sketches of the B-29 fuselage, labeled in neat handwriting. He unrolls it slowly, running his fingers over the pencil lines. He remembers the day he first examined the wreck, the smell of oil and burned metal, the thrill of curiosity before the weight of understanding. He whispers, "We wanted to learn from you." We did. Then he folds the paper carefully and slips it into his case, not as a blueprint but as a confession. By summer, the news reaches Tachikawa. America has a new weapon, something beyond even the Superfortress. Kudo doesn't believe it at first. A single bomb that can destroy an entire city? Absurd. Then August comes. Hiroshima. Nagasaki. He doesn't cry. He doesn't shout. He simply sits by the window watching smoke drift across the distant hills and says quietly to himself, "It was never about the bomb. It was always about the men who could build one." August 15, 1945, Tokyo. The radio crackles through the static. Every street, every shop, every home has fallen silent. In a trembling voice, the Emperor of Japan addresses his people for the first time in history. He speaks of a new and most cruel bomb, of unbearable suffering, and of the need to endure the unendurable. Colonel Hajime Kudo stands in his small room at the Tachikawa arsenal, his uniform wrinkled, his hands clasped behind his back. Outside, even the cicadas have stopped their song. When the transmission ends, no one moves. Japan has surrendered. The war, and the dream that industry and sacrifice could balance power against the West, is over. The silence after the storm. For hours, Kudo doesn't speak. He walks through the empty hangars where once hundreds of workers toiled. The air smells of dust, not oil. Half-assembled airframes stand like skeletons under torn canvas. On the floor, the chalk markings for new fighter prototype have faded. He stops beside a pile of wreckage, the twisted remains of an engine cowling from a Ki-84. Its edges are jagged, its rivets misaligned. Beside it lies a polished section of the captured B-29, still perfect even scorched by fire. He kneels, touching the American metal gently. The surface feels cold but smooth, unmarred by war. He whispers, "We fought with courage, but they fought with capacity." Factories without fuel. Days later, Kudo visits the Nakajima plant one last time. The machinery is silent, lathes rusting, conveyor belts frozen mid-turn. Workers wander like ghosts, unsure whether to clean, dismantle, or wait for orders that will never come. In the corner, a young technician is prying open a crate marked turbocharger assembly. Kudo walks over. Inside are half-finished impeller housings, their surfaces rough from rushed casting. The boy looks up. "Sir, we tried to copy it. We couldn't make it spin true." Kudo nods softly. "You weren't the failure. The nation was." He points to the sky outside the broken windows. "They could build 10 of those before we finished one." The boy lowers his head. An empire of shortages. The war had taught Kudo an unforgiving truth. Japan had brilliant engineers, brave pilots, and extraordinary discipline, but not the resources or infrastructure to sustain them. Everything was scarce: fuel, rubber, aluminum, copper, even food. Factories were dismantled to build others. Workers reused rivets. Engines were tested with substitute fuels that corroded valves after 10 hours. In the end, even innovation couldn't escape scarcity. He had once believed Japan could overcome its material limits with skill and willpower. But standing amid the wreckage, he finally understood what the war had proven beyond question. Engineering genius means nothing without the world behind it. In early September, American forces arrive. Uniformed officers, their boots shining, walk the same floors that once held secret projects. They speak politely, almost casually, to their Japanese counterparts. An interpreter asks Kudo to join a U.S. Army Air Forces inspection team. He's surprised when one American officer, a tall man with wire-rimmed glasses, greets him in halting Japanese. "I read your report on the B-29, the officer says. "It was thorough." Kudo bows slightly. "It was honest," he replies. The American smiles faintly. "That's rare even on our side." He glances at the silent machines. "You know, back home, our workers made a bomber like that every 2 hours." Kudo closes his eyes. "Yes," he says quietly. "I know." A nation reduced to lessons. That evening, he writes one last entry in his notebook. "We were not defeated by pilots or by planes. We were defeated by process, by a nation that turned science into rhythm and labor into music. They built with a precision we could only admire, not equal. We built with our hearts. They built with their minds. And the mind won." He tears the page from his notebook and folds it carefully, slipping it inside his jacket. Outside, the sound of unfamiliar engines grows louder. American transports landing, bringing food, supplies, and occupation troops. For the first time in years, the sky over Tokyo hums with aircraft not meant for war. Kudo looks up and whispers, "Perhaps machines can rebuild what machines destroyed." September 1945, Tachikawa, Japan. The war is over. The flags have changed, but the smoke still lingers. Factories lie in ruins, rail lines twisted, cities flattened. What was once the beating heart of an empire's industry now looks like a graveyard of metal and silence. Colonel Hajime Kudo, no longer a colonel now, walks through what remains of the Tachikawa air arsenal. American troops have turned it into a depot, yet they let a few Japanese engineers stay behind to help catalog machinery. He moves slowly, clipboard in hand, noting every machine still capable of turning. Each one feels like an artifact from a vanished world. The Americans return, but not as enemies. A week later, a convoy of U.S. Army trucks arrives. Soldiers unload boxes stamped U.S. Army Air Forces. Inside are tools, manuals, and spare parts. The same kind of crates he once saw carrying fragments of a captured B-29. Only this time they aren't secrets, they're gifts. A major from the Occupation Command greets Kudo politely. "We'll need your help getting these local workshops running again," he says. "Japan's engineers know these machines better than anyone." Kudo bows slightly. "We built for war," he replies. The American smiles. "Then now you'll build for peace." For a long moment, Kudo says nothing. Then he nods. Perhaps that's what the machine was trying to teach us all along. Teaching the new generation. Over the next months, Kudo is asked to lecture young engineers, survivors, many still in ragged clothes. They gather in a cold classroom rebuilt from scrap wood. He writes one word on the blackboard: precision. He tells them about the B-29 structure, not as a weapon but as an idea. Precision, he says, is not just about measurement. It is a way of thinking. It means respecting the material, respecting the worker, respecting the process. The students listen silently. Most have never seen an airplane up close. Yet they write every word. He adds softly, "A nation that learns this will never be powerless again." The legacy of the machine. By 1947, Japan's skies are filled not with bombers, but with civilian transports and weather planes, many repaired or redesigned by the same men who once studied their wreckage. Kudo walks through the workshops of Nakajima, now renamed Fuji Heavy Industries. He watches young engineers using American lathes, Japanese blueprints, and new hope. In the corner, he sees an engine test stand roar to life, a small radial modeled after the R-2800. The sound is different this time. Not a growl of war, but a hum of rebuilding. He smiles faintly. "We learned from the giants who burned us," he says quietly. "And from the ashes we built something stronger." Years later, as old age creeps in, Kudo keeps one relic on his desk, a piece of aluminum skin from the B-29 he once studied at Tachikawa. He polishes it every morning, not out of reverence, but remembrance. To visitors he calls it the mirror. Because every time he looks into it, he sees both sides of the war, the pride that blinded his people and the brilliance that rebuilt them. On the back of the metal, he's engraved a single line. From destruction comes discipline. From discipline, creation. He smiles, places the relic back on the shelf, and whispers, "We could not match the machine that broke us. But we learned how to build because of it." Outside, the sound of a jet echoes over Tokyo. Sleek, silver, effortless. The future has arrived. And at last, Japan has learned to build its own wings. Tokyo, 2 decades later. A new skyline glitters where ashes once smoldered. Trains glide silently, ships hum through the bay, and aircraft lift from Haneda Airport. Sleek, efficient, and proudly Japanese-built. The empire that once crumbled under its own limits has risen again, this time built on precision, process, and peace. In a small apartment near Tachikawa, Hajime Kudo, now an old man, sits beside his window. On the table lies a photograph of the Boeing B-29, next to a new one, a Mitsubishi passenger jet. He looks at both, smiling faintly. He remembers the roar of those engines, the smell of burnt oil, the shock of realizing what true industrial power looked like. But he also remembers what came after, a generation that learned, improved, and transformed. "They defeated us with machines," he writes in his final note. "But it was those same machines that taught us how to rebuild. In their shadow we found our light." He places his pen down and looks outside, where children laugh as a jet streaks overhead, its silver wings catching the sun. The sound no longer brings fear, only wonder. Wars reveal the limits of courage, but they also reveal the boundless power of knowledge. The B-29 Superfortress was not only an aircraft, it was a lesson carved in steel. And for those who survived to learn it, the lesson outlived the war itself. Because in the end, the true measure of civilization is not how it destroys, but how it rebuilds. If this story moved you, if you want more forgotten chapters of courage, engineering, and human resolve, then stay with us. Subscribe to Shadows of Valor, where history isn't just told, it's relived. Every week, we bring you the untold stories behind the machines, the men, and the moments that shaped our world. Like, comment, remember, history breathes here, and you're part of it.